Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. December had barely begun when my boss practically shoved me out the door, insisting I use the vacation days I had been hoarding since joining the accounting firm 5 years earlier. My sister always joked that by the time our old high school classmates were having their second kids, I would still be married to spreadsheets and audit reports. She was not wrong. So when a coworker mentioned his uncle rented out a cabin near Lake Champlain in Vermont, I figured why not. The place was about 3 hours from Burlington, deep in the woods, the kind of isolated retreat that promised silence and maybe a chance to remember what relaxation felt like. I packed light. Some books, my laptop, enough groceries for a week, and a bottle of whiskey I'd been saving for a special occasion. The forecast mentioned snow, but nothing that seemed serious enough to cancel my plans. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and the cabin exceeded my expectations in the best way possible. It sat at the end of a winding gravel road, surrounded by towering pines that blocked most of the gray winter sky. The structure itself was old but solid, built from dark timber that had weathered decades of harsh Vermont winters. Inside, I found a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a different decade, one bedroom with a surprisingly comfortable queen bed, and a bathroom with plumbing that groaned but functioned. The owner, a man named Harold Brennan who spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who valued his own time, had left a binder with instructions about the generator, the water heater, and the woodpile stacked under a tarp behind the cabin. He also left his number for emergencies, though he warned that cell service was unreliable at best. I remember thinking that was part of the charm. The first 2 days passed in exactly the kind of peaceful monotony I had craved. I woke up late, made coffee in the percolator I found in a cabinet, read by the fire, and took short walks along the trail that led toward a frozen creek about half a mile from the cabin. The silence was extraordinary. Not the absence of noise you get in a quiet apartment, but something deeper, almost physical. At night, the darkness outside the windows was so complete that it felt like the cabin was floating in a void. I slept better than I had in years. On Saturday morning, I noticed the sky had turned the color of wet cement, and the temperature had dropped significantly. I checked my phone, which had exactly 1 bar of signal if I stood near the kitchen window at a specific angle, and saw the weather alert. A major winter storm was moving in faster than originally predicted. They were calling for up to 2 feet of snow, high winds, and near zero visibility by evening. I spent the afternoon preparing as best I could. I brought extra firewood inside, filled every container I could find with water in case the pipes froze, and made sure I knew how to operate the backup generator Harold had mentioned. By 4 in the afternoon, the snow had started falling with an intensity that surprised me. The flakes were not the gentle, picturesque kind you see on Christmas cards. These were dense, heavy, driven sideways by gusts that made the cabin walls creak. Within an hour, the gravel road had completely disappeared under a white blanket, and the pine trees at the edge of the clearing had become vague, dark shapes behind curtains of swirling snow. I told myself this was fine, even exciting in a way. I had food, I had heat, I had nowhere I needed to be. The storm would pass, the plows would come eventually, and I would have a good story to tell back at the office. That confidence lasted until about 6:30. When every light in the cabin flickered twice and then went dark. The sudden blackness was disorienting in a way I had not anticipated. I sat there on the couch for a long moment, waiting for the lights to come back on, listening to the wind howl against the windows like something trying to get in. When it became clear the power was not returning on its own, I fumbled for my phone and used its flashlight to find the candles Harold had mentioned in his binder. There were about a dozen of them in a kitchen drawer, along with a box of matches that smelled faintly of sulfur. I lit 3 and placed them around the main room, creating small islands of flickering orange light that barely pushed back the darkness. The fireplace was still going strong, thank God, so at least I had warmth and some visibility in that part of the cabin. I tried my phone again, hoping to call Harold or maybe reach emergency services, but the signal had vanished completely. The storm must have knocked out the nearest cell tower, or maybe the conditions were just too severe for any signal to penetrate. Either way, I was officially cut off from the outside world. The generator was my next thought, but Harold's instructions had been clear that it was only for true emergencies and required manual startup from outside. The unit sat in a small shed about 30 feet from the back door, near the woodpile. I put on my heaviest coat, pulled a wool hat down over my ears, and grabbed the flashlight I had seen in the closet by the front entrance. When I opened the back door, the cold hit me like a physical blow. That deep, wet, penetrating cold that Vermont winters specialize in. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see the woodpile, and the wind immediately tried to rip the door from my grip. I stepped outside, sinking almost to my knees in the fresh accumulation, and made my way toward the generator shed. That was when I first noticed the footprints. They emerged from the tree line to my left, a trail of depressions in the snow that curved around the side of the cabin rather than approaching the front door or the road. They were partially filled in, maybe an hour or two old based on how much fresh snow had accumulated inside them, but still distinctly visible in the beam of my flashlight. I stood there for a moment, snow pelting my face, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that maybe Harold had come by to check on the property before the storm hit, or perhaps a neighbor from one of the other cabins in the area had wandered over for some reason. But that did not explain why the prints went around the cabin instead of toward the front door, and it did not explain why there were no prints leading back out. The rational part of my brain, the part that had spent years analyzing data and finding logical explanations for discrepancies, insisted there had to be a simple answer. Maybe the person had walked around the entire cabin and then left via the road, and those prints were already buried. Maybe it was just a hiker who had gotten turned around in the early snow and used the cabin as a landmark before continuing on their way. I told myself these things as I trudged to the generator shed, got the unit running after 3 attempts, and made my way back inside. The lights came on with a reassuring hum, and I locked the back door behind me, stamping snow off my boots onto the mat. I checked the front door too, confirming it was locked, and even tested the windows in the bedroom and bathroom. Everything was secure. I poured myself a glass of the whiskey I had brought, sat down by the fire, and tried to convince myself I was being ridiculous. The next hour passed slowly. I attempted to read, but found myself rereading the same paragraph over and over, my attention constantly pulled toward the windows and the impenetrable white darkness beyond them. The wind had picked up even more, creating strange whistling sounds as it forced its way through gaps I had not noticed before. Every few minutes the cabin would groan or pop as the old timber adjusted to the temperature, and each time my heart would jump before I recognized the sound for what it was. I kept thinking about those footprints, playing the image over in my mind, trying to remember details I might have missed. Had there been just one set of prints, or could there have been 2? How large were they, average size or bigger? I had not thought to look closely, too focused on reaching the generator and getting back inside. Around 8 o'clock I decided to make myself some dinner, more for the distraction than actual hunger. I was standing at the stove, heating up a can of soup when I heard it. A soft click, barely audible over the wind and the hiss of the gas burner. It came from somewhere behind me, toward the back of the cabin. The sound a door hinge makes when it moves just slightly, metal shifting against metal. I turned off the burner and stood completely still, holding my breath, straining to hear anything over the storm. For a long moment there was nothing but wind and the crackle of the fire in the other room. I started to exhale, started to tell myself it was just the cabin settling again, when I heard something else. A floorboard creaking, the particular groan of old wood taking weight. It came from the hallway that connected the bedroom and bathroom to the main living area. I had walked that hallway dozens of times over the past few days, and I knew exactly which boards made noise and which ones did not. This was the third board from the bathroom door, the one with the slight warp that always protested when you stepped on it. Someone was in my cabin. The realization hit me with a clarity that felt almost calm, the way your mind sometimes goes quiet when faced with something too immediate for panic. I looked around the kitchen for anything I could use as a weapon. The knife block on the counter held a few dull blades that Harold probably used for vegetables. I grabbed the largest one, a chef's knife with a wooden handle worn smooth from years of use, and positioned myself so I could see the hallway entrance while keeping my back against the refrigerator. The seconds stretched into something elastic and unbearable. I watched the dark mouth of that hallway, waiting for a shape to emerge, waiting for some confirmation that I was not losing my mind. The generator hummed steadily outside. The light stayed on and the fire continued its oblivious crackling in the living room. Then I heard another creak, this one from a different board, closer to the hallway entrance. Whoever was back there was moving slowly, carefully, like someone who knew exactly where they were going and was in no hurry to get there. I thought about calling out, demanding to know who was there, but something stopped me. If this person had snuck into the cabin during a blizzard, had waited silently while I checked the locks and poured my whiskey and tried to read, they were not here for a friendly introduction. They had been counting on the storm, on my isolation, on the fact that no one could reach me and I could not reach anyone else. My phone sat uselessly on the coffee table in the living room. No signal, no help. The nearest neighbor was probably 5 miles away, and the road was impassable. Even if I could get outside, I would freeze to death before I made it anywhere. I was trapped in this cabin with someone who had chosen this exact situation to make their move. I made a decision in that moment, the kind of decision you make when every option is terrible, and hesitation feels like the worst choice of all. Instead of waiting for whoever it was to come to me, I moved first. I crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps, flattened myself against the wall beside the hallway entrance and listened. The breathing I heard was not my own. It was slower, more controlled, coming from just around the corner, maybe 6 feet away. I could smell something faint beneath the wood smoke and the cold air that had crept inside. Cigarettes, stale and ingrained in fabric, mixed with something earthier, like damp soil. I gripped the knife tighter and tried to think. The light switch for the hallway was on the other side of the entrance, impossible to reach without exposing myself. But I remembered the cabin's layout, remembered that the bathroom had a small window above the toilet, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. If this person had come in through that window, they had left it open or unlocked. If I could get past them, get to the front door, maybe I could make it to my car. The keys were in my coat pocket, and my coat was hanging by the front entrance. It was insane. It was probably suicide in this weather, but staying here felt worse. I do not know where the courage came from, or maybe it was not courage at all, but something more like desperate animal instinct. I grabbed a ceramic mug from the counter and hurled it down the hallway as hard as I could. It shattered against the far wall with a sharp crack, and in that same instant I heard movement. Fast movement. Someone reacting to the sound. I did not wait to see what happened. I ran for the front door, my socks sliding on the wooden floor, and grabbed my coat from the hook without stopping to put it on. My fingers found the deadbolt, twisted it open, and I threw myself out into the screaming white void of the storm. The cold was immediate and brutal, cutting through my sweater like it was made of paper. I could not see more than 3 feet in front of me, but I knew roughly where I had parked, and I ran in that direction, high-stepping through snow that came up past my knees. Behind me, I heard the cabin door bang open against the wall. Someone was following. I found my car more by luck than memory, my outstretched hand colliding with the cold metal of the hood. I fumbled with the coat, jamming my arms into the sleeves while trying to dig the keys from the pocket. The engine turned over on the second try. I had never been more grateful for anything in my life. I threw the car into reverse, felt the tires spin uselessly for a horrifying moment, then catch on something solid beneath the snow. The headlights cut through the blizzard just enough to show me a figure standing about 20 feet away, motionless, watching. It was a man, tall and lean, wearing dark clothing that was already coated in white. I could not make out his face through the snow, but I could see he was holding something in his right hand, something that caught the headlight beam with a dull metallic glint. I did not wait to identify it. I swung the car around, felt it fishtail wildly, and aimed for where I remembered the road beginning. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. I drove at maybe 10 miles per hour, unable to see the road, running off into ditches twice and somehow managing to rock the car free both times. My phone found a single bar of signal somewhere around midnight, and I called 911 with fingers so numb I could barely press the buttons. The police found the cabin the next morning after the storm had passed. The bathroom window was open, the latch forced from outside. Inside, they discovered muddy boot prints throughout the hallway and bedroom, along with a backpack hidden under the bed containing duct tape, zip ties, a hunting knife, and a prepaid phone with no contact saved. They never caught the man. The detective who interviewed me, a tired-looking woman named Audrey Sims, told me they suspected it was connected to 2 other break-ins at remote properties in the region over the past year, though those victims had not been as lucky as me. She did not elaborate on what that meant, and I did not ask. Harold Brennan refunded my rental payment and apologized profusely, though I could tell he was more worried about liability than my well-being. I drove back to my apartment in Burlington that same day, checked into a hotel instead, and did not sleep without the lights on for the next 3 months. Even now, 2 years later, I cannot hear the creak of a floorboard or the click of a door hinge without my whole body going rigid. I still do not know who that man was or why he chose that cabin, that night, that storm, but I know he was patient, I know he was prepared, and I know that if I had waited another 30 seconds in that kitchen, I would not be here to write this. Lydia Marsh knocked on my door sometime in early November with a flyer and a pitch about the county shelter's toy drive. She lived 3 houses down, had 2 golden retrievers, and possessed the kind of relentless cheerfulness that made refusing her feel like kicking a puppy. So I signed up. By mid-month, I had become weirdly obsessed with the whole thing, buying discounted toys during my lunch breaks, asking coworkers at the insurance office if they had anything to donate, even wrapping some of the gifts myself with paper covered in cartoon snowmen. It gave me something to focus on, which I desperately needed. My marriage had ended that spring after barely 2 years, and at 26, living alone in a small house on Birchwood Lane, I was still figuring out who I was outside of being someone's wife. The toy drive became my project, my distraction. By that Saturday morning in late fall, I had 2 heavy shopping bags stuffed with donations sitting by my front closet, waiting for the official neighborhood pickup scheduled for Sunday afternoon. That Saturday began like any other day off, slow, aimless, deliberately lazy. I made coffee around 9, let my cat Clementine yell at me until I refilled her food bowl, and decided to finish hanging the last of my holiday decorations. The weather outside was sharp and bright, frost still visible on the grass even though the sun had been up for hours. I put on a playlist of old Christmas songs, the kind with crooning vocals and orchestral arrangements that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen. Bing Crosby, Nat King Cole, all those voices from another era filling my living room while I untangled a string of lights. Around 11, I was standing on a step stool near the window, trying to hook an ornament onto a high branch, when I heard kids laughing somewhere down the block. Normal neighborhood sounds. Safe sounds. I stepped down, surveyed my work, and decided the tree looked decent enough. Then came the knock, 3 soft taps on my front door. I glanced at the clock on the mantel, 11:47. My first thought was that Lydia had come a day early for the donations. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked toward the door, still humming along to the music. He was not what I expected. Through the glass panel beside my door, I could see a man, maybe mid-30s, average height, wearing a red Santa hat and a navy blue puffer jacket. He held a clipboard against his chest and offered a small wave when he noticed me looking. His face was plain, forgettable even, The kind of face you might see at a grocery store and never think about again. He had a short beard, neatly trimmed, and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light. I opened the door but kept the storm door closed between us the way my mother had taught me. He smiled immediately, a warm and easy smile, and introduced himself as a volunteer with the Greenfield Family Alliance. He said they were doing last-minute rounds in the neighborhood, collecting toy donations for families who would not make it home for the holidays. Parents stuck working, relatives in hospitals, that sort of thing. His voice was calm and earnest, almost rehearsed, but not quite. He gestured vaguely toward the street, mentioning that several neighbors had already contributed. I noticed a white van parked a few houses down, unmarked, its engine apparently off. I should have asked more questions. I should have called Lydia to confirm, or at least asked to see some identification. But he seemed so genuine, so unassuming, and his story tugged at something in me. Those families, those kids who might not have presents otherwise. He mentioned that the deadline was tight, that they needed to sort and distribute everything by Monday morning. I thought about the 2 bags sitting in my closet, already packed and ready. The official pickup was not until Sunday, but what difference did a day make? I told him to wait a moment, then unlatched the storm door and stepped back to let him into the foyer while I grabbed the donations. The music was still playing. White Christmas had just started, Bing Crosby's voice smooth and unhurried. I pointed toward the living room and told him he could step inside where it was warm, that I would only be a second. He thanked me politely, wiped his boots on the mat and walked past me into the house. I turned toward the closet, reached for the bags on the floor, and heard the soft click of the front door closing behind him. At the time, I thought nothing of it. He was just keeping the cold out. When I turned back around, bags in hand, he was standing in the middle of my living room. The clipboard he had been holding was now resting face down on my kitchen counter, and his posture had shifted, something subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders were squared, his hands loose at his sides, and the friendly smile had vanished completely. His face was blank now, almost bored, like he had taken off a mask he no longer needed. The Santa hat suddenly looked grotesque, a joke that was not funny anymore. I asked if everything was okay, my voice coming out higher than I intended. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying me the way someone might examine an insect pinned to a board. Clementine had disappeared, probably hiding under the bed, the way she always did when strangers came over. The music kept playing, some cheerful melody about sleigh bells, and the absurdity of it made everything feel dreamlike and wrong. I took a step backward, still holding the bags, and asked again what was going on. He finally spoke, and his voice was different now, flatter, emptier, stripped of the warmth from before. He said I had a nice place. He said he had been watching the neighborhood for a few weeks, learning the routines, figuring out who lived alone. My chest tightened, and I felt my breathing go shallow. He took a slow step toward me, and I instinctively moved back until my hip bumped against the edge of the couch. I asked him what he wanted, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to sound calm even though every nerve in my body was screaming. He said he had not decided yet. That was the part that terrified me most. Not anger, not threats, just that casual indifference, like I was a problem he was still working out in his head. I glanced toward the front door and saw what I had missed before. The deadbolt was turned. He had locked it. The bag slipped from my grip and hit the floor with a soft thud, toys scattering across the carpet. Outside, I could still hear those kids laughing somewhere down the block, completely unaware of what was happening inside my house. My phone was on the kitchen counter, maybe 10 feet away, sitting right next to that clipboard. He noticed me glance toward it and shook his head slowly, almost like a disappointed teacher. He told me not to do anything stupid. He said he did not want this to get complicated. I tried to think, tried to remember anything useful from those self-defense articles I had skimmed online but never taken seriously. My back door led to the yard, but it was on the other side of the kitchen, past him. The windows were old and painted shut. I had been meaning to fix that for months. My mind raced through options and found nothing. He started walking toward me, not fast, not aggressive, just steady and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I backed up until I hit the wall near the hallway, my shoulder knocking a framed photo that clattered but did not fall. He stopped about 3 feet away and just stood there, looking at me with those flat, empty eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Up close, I noticed a small scar near his left eyebrow, a thin white line cutting through the skin. He smelled like cigarettes and something else, something chemical, like industrial cleaner. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, and I thought that was it. I thought he was going to pull out a knife or a gun or something worse. Instead, he pulled out a roll of duct tape. Gray, industrial, the heavy-duty kind. He started peeling back the edge with his thumbnail, the sound of the adhesive separating making my skin prickle. He told me to turn around and put my hands behind my back. His voice was calm, instructional, like he was explaining how to assemble furniture. I did not move. I could not move. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, rooted to the floor and trembling. He sighed, a small exhale of irritation, and repeated himself. Slower this time, enunciating each word like I was a child who did not understand. I thought about screaming, but the music was still playing, and the nearest neighbor was Lydia, 3 houses down, probably inside with her dogs. I thought about fighting, but he was bigger than me and I had never thrown a punch in my life. So I did something desperate and stupid. I ran. Not toward the door, not toward the kitchen, but down the hallway toward my bedroom where I knew there was a lock on the door and a phone charger plugged into the wall, which meant maybe, just maybe, my old backup phone was still in the nightstand drawer. I heard him curse behind me, his boots heavy on the hardwood as he followed. I made it to the bedroom and slammed the door, twisting the lock just as his weight crashed against the other side. The whole frame shook and I stumbled backward, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He hit the door again, and I heard the wood creak, the cheap lock straining against the force. I lunged for the nightstand and yanked the drawer open so hard it came off the rails and clattered to the floor. There it was, my old phone, the one I had replaced 6 months ago, still connected to the charger. I grabbed it with trembling fingers and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The screen stayed black. I pressed it again, holding it down, begging silently for it to turn on. Behind me, another slam against the door, and this time I heard something crack. He was not yelling, not threatening, just methodically throwing his shoulder into the wood like it was a minor inconvenience. The phone finally lit up, the battery icon flashing. 2%. Enough. I dialed 911 and pressed the phone to my ear, my whole body shaking as I backed into the corner between the bed and the wall. The operator answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional. I started talking before she could finish her greeting, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Someone in my house, he locked the door. I am in the bedroom, please send someone. She asked for my address, and I gave it to her, my voice cracking. She told me to stay on the line, that help was on the way. Another crash against the door, and this time I saw the frame splinter near the lock, a jagged crack running through the painted wood. I told the operator he was breaking down the door. She said officers were 4 minutes out. 4 minutes, it might as well have been 4 hours. I looked around the room for anything I could use as a weapon, a lamp, a book, something. My eyes landed on the baseball bat my ex-husband had left behind, shoved in the back of the closet during the divorce. I had kept it for exactly this kind of nightmare scenario, though I never actually believed it would happen. I grabbed it with my free hand and positioned myself facing the door, the phone still pressed to my ear, the operator still talking in that steady, measured tone. The door shuttered again, and the lock finally gave way, the whole thing swinging inward with a sharp crack. He stood in the doorway, breathing a little heavier now, the Santa hat slightly askew on his head. He looked at me, then at the bat, and for a moment neither of us moved. He took one step into the room and I swung. Not gracefully, not like in the movies, just a wild, desperate arc aimed at whatever part of him I could reach. The bat connected with his forearm as he raised it to block, and I heard a dull crack that might have been bone or might have been wood. He let out a sharp grunt and stumbled sideways, clutching his arm. I did not wait. I swung again, this time catching him on the shoulder, and he dropped to one knee. The operator was still talking in my ear, asking what was happening, and I remember screaming that he was in the room, that I hit him, that I needed help now. He looked up at me from the floor, and for the first time I saw something other than blankness in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pain, or just the realization that this was not going the way he had planned. I raised the bat again, ready to keep swinging until he stopped moving. But then I heard it. Sirens. Faint at first, then louder, getting closer. He heard them too. Something shifted in his expression, a quick calculation behind those wire-rimmed glasses. He pushed himself up, still cradling his arm, and back toward the doorway. He told me this was not over, his voice tight with pain, and then he was gone. Down the hallway, through the living room, out the back door I had forgotten was unlocked. The police found the white van abandoned 2 blocks away, engine still warm, the keys on the floor beneath the driver's seat. Inside, they found duct tape, zip ties, a hunting knife, and a duffel bag with a change of clothes. No identification, no registration that led anywhere real. The detective who took my statement said they had seen setups like this before. Predators who scouted neighborhoods, who used charity scams or delivery uniforms to get inside, who targeted women living alone. She said I was lucky. She said most people do not get away. They caught him 3 weeks later in another state, pulled over for a broken taillight of all things. His real name was something ordinary that I have since blocked out, and he had warrants in 2 other counties for similar incidents, though the detective implied those women had not been as fortunate as me. I testified at his trial the following spring, sat in that courtroom and looked at his face while lawyers argued about evidence and intent. He never looked back at me, not once. He just stared straight ahead with that same blank expression, like I was nothing, like the whole thing had been a minor inconvenience in his day. He got 25 years. I got nightmares that lasted longer than my marriage ever did, and a security system I checked 3 times before bed every single night. "9 years doing this job, and I thought I had seen every kind of call there is. My partner Lonnie and I had been running non-stop since 6 in the evening that night, and by the time midnight rolled around, we had already handled 2 car accidents on icy roads, 1 cardiac arrest at a family dinner, and a diabetic emergency at a grocery store parking lot. I started in EMS right after getting my certification, back when most of my high school friends were still figuring out college. That particular shift fell on one of the coldest nights we had all winter, the kind of cold that bites through your uniform no matter how many layers you wear underneath. We had just finished restocking the rig at the hospital when dispatch crackled through with another call. Unconscious male, found in a snowbank behind the Riverside Plaza shopping center. Caller reported seeing him collapse after what looked like a holiday party. Said the guy had been stumbling around before going down. Lonnie groaned and pulled back onto the road while I logged the call details. Neither of us thought twice about it. Calls like that are common during the holidays. People drink too much at office parties and end up hypothermic in a ditch somewhere. We pulled into the back lot of Riverside Plaza around 12:20 in the morning. The shopping center had closed hours ago, and the only lights came from a few security lamps scattered across the massive parking area. The snow had been falling steady all night, maybe 3 or 4 inches accumulated since our shift started. Lonnie parked near the dumpsters where dispatch said the caller had spotted the man, and we grabbed our gear. I remember the silence when I stepped out of the ambulance, that heavy kind of quiet you only get during a snowstorm, when everything feels muffled and distant. We walked toward the snowbank with our flashlights cutting through the dark, but there was nobody there. No unconscious man, no party-goer sleeping off too many drinks. What we did find made me stop walking. There were drag marks in the snow, 2 long parallel lines with footprints on either side, like someone had been pulled. The tracks led away from the parking lot and disappeared into a tree line about 40 yards out. Lonnie looked at me, and I looked at him, and without saying anything, we both understood that something was wrong with this whole situation. I radioed dispatch to confirm the call details. The operator repeated everything back. Unconscious male behind Riverside Plaza. Caller used a prepaid cell phone. No registered owner on file. When I asked if the caller had left a callback number, she told me the line went dead right after giving the location. Lonnie suggested maybe someone found the guy and took him inside to warm up, which made sense for about 3 seconds until I pointed my flashlight at those drag marks again. They went in the wrong direction, away from any buildings, straight toward the woods. Nobody drags an unconscious person into a frozen tree line in the middle of the night. We stood there trying to figure out what to do when dispatch came through again. Another call, same situation. Unconscious person reported at a maintenance building about 200 yards north of our location. The caller specifically mentioned seeing our ambulance lights and said the person was inside the building. Lonnie wanted to call for police backup, but dispatch said all units were tied up, handling a pileup on the interstate. We were on our own, at least for the next 20 minutes. The maintenance building sat at the edge of the shopping center property, a squat concrete structure that probably housed electrical equipment or storage for the plaza. It had been abandoned for a while based on the look of it, windows boarded up, a heavy metal door hanging slightly open. Fresh footprints led up to the entrance, and I mean fresh, like someone had walked in there within the last few minutes. Lonnie stayed by the rig to grab the radio and keep eyes on our surroundings while I approached the door. My flashlight beam cut through the gap and showed nothing but darkness and what looked like old shelving units covered in dust. I called out, identifying myself as a paramedic, asking if anyone needed help. No response. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, scanning left and right. The air was freezing, colder than outside somehow, and it smelled like rust and stagnant water. I moved deeper into the building, checking behind shelves and around corners when I heard it. The distinct crunch of footsteps in snow, not inside with me, but outside. And then the heavy groan of that metal door swinging shut behind me. I spun around and rushed back toward the entrance, nearly tripping over a pile of old pipes on the floor. When I reached the door, it was closed but not locked. I pushed it open and stumbled back outside into the snow, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The first thing I did was look for Lonnie and the ambulance. The rig was still there, lights still flashing red and white against the falling snow, but Lonnie was nowhere in sight. I called his name, loud, and got nothing back but the muffled silence of the storm. That was when I noticed the footprints around our ambulance. Not one set, not two, but what looked like at least 3 or 4 different people had walked circles around our vehicle while I was inside that building. The prints came from the tree line, looped around the rig multiple times, and then disappeared back toward the woods. Some of them stopped right at the driver's side door. I ran toward the ambulance, slipping twice on the ice beneath the fresh powder, screaming for Lonnie the whole way. He was inside the rig, crouched down between the stretcher and the supply cabinets, holding his radio in one hand and a pair of trauma shears in the other. When I yanked open the back doors, he nearly stabbed me with them before realizing it was me. His face was pale, not from the cold, but from fear, a look I had never seen on him in all the years we worked together. He told me what happened in short, panicked bursts. Right after I went into that building, he saw figures emerge from the tree line. 3 of them, maybe 4. He could not tell for sure because they stayed just outside the reach of our emergency lights. They walked toward the ambulance slowly, not rushing, not speaking, just approaching in total silence. Lonnie locked himself inside and tried to radio for help, but all he got was static. The figures circled the rig for what felt like forever, occasionally stopping to look through the windows. One of them tried the door handle on the driver's side. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the woods. By the time I came out of that building, they were gone. We did not waste another second at that location. I jumped into the driver's seat while Lonnie stayed in the back, still gripping those trauma shears like his life depended on it. My fingers were numb and clumsy as I threw the rig into drive and pulled out of that parking lot faster than I should have on icy roads. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see headlights following us, or figures running behind the ambulance, but there was nothing except darkness and snow. When we finally got back onto the main road, I radioed dispatch and told them we were returning to base, that the calls were false, and we needed to speak with a supervisor immediately. The operator sounded confused, asked me to repeat myself, and then put me on hold. Lonnie climbed into the front passenger seat and just sat there staring straight ahead, his breath visible in quick little clouds. He asked me if I thought they were going to kill us. I told him I did not know, but the way they had set everything up, the fake calls, the separation, the circling, it felt like a hunt, like we were being tested or sized up for something worse. Back at the station, we filed an incident report and waited for the police to send someone over to take our statements. It took almost 2 hours before a detective showed up, a tired-looking woman who introduced herself as Ramsey from the County Criminal Investigations Unit. She did not seem surprised by anything we told her, which bothered me more than the whole experience at Riverside Plaza. When I finished describing the drag marks, the maintenance building, and the figures around our ambulance, she nodded slowly and pulled out a folder from her bag. Inside were printed reports, at least a dozen of them, all from the past 3 weeks. She spread them across the table and told us what we had walked into. There had been multiple ambush attempts on first responders across the region that month, all following the same pattern. Fake emergency calls placed from untraceable prepaid phones, remote locations, attempts to separate partners or lure individuals away from their vehicles. 2 EMTs in a neighboring county had been assaulted and robbed of their medical supplies and equipment. A firefighter responding to a false structure fire had his truck stolen while he searched an empty building. Ramsey told us we were lucky. The group, or groups because they were not sure if it was one organized crew or copycats, had been escalating. The earliest incidents were just thefts, grab what you can and run. But the more recent ones involved physical confrontations, zip ties found at one scene, a roll of duct tape at another. She asked us to describe the figures Lonnie saw in as much detail as possible, but there was not much to tell. Dark clothing, average height, no distinguishing features visible in the snow and darkness. Could have been anyone. That was the part that stuck with me the most, sitting in that fluorescent-lit station at 3 in the morning, realizing that the people who had surrounded our ambulance looked like anybody else. They were not monsters or criminals you could spot from a distance. They were just people who had decided that paramedics responding to fake emergencies made easy targets. Ramsey collected our statements, gave us her card, and told us to call if we remembered anything else. Before she left, she mentioned that they had recovered one of the prepaid phones used to make a false call the week before. No fingerprints. Bought with cash at a convenience store 60 miles away. Completely untraceable. I finished my shift that night because we were short-staffed and there was no one to replace me. Lonnie went home early, said he needed to be with his wife and kids, and I did not blame him for that. The rest of the night passed without incident, just routine calls, a slip and fall at a nursing home, chest pain that turned out to be anxiety, the usual stuff that keeps you busy until sunrise. But I could not shake what had happened. Every time we pulled up to a scene, I found myself scanning the tree lines, checking for footprints that should not be there, looking for figures standing just outside the light. When my relief finally arrived at 7 in the morning, I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes before I felt calm enough to drive home. I kept thinking about those drag marks in the snow behind Riverside Plaza. There was no victim, no unconscious man from a holiday party. The drag marks were bait, staged to make us curious, to draw us toward the woods or keep us distracted while they moved into position. Someone had planned that, had thought it through, had known exactly how paramedics would react to what they found. The police never made any arrests connected to what happened to us that night. Ramsey called me once, about 3 weeks later, to tell me that the incidents had suddenly stopped. No more fake calls, no more ambush attempts, nothing. The group or whoever they were just vanished like they had never existed. She said sometimes these things happen. Criminals move to a different area or get spooked by increased police presence, and decide to lay low. But she did not sound convinced, and neither was I. I still work EMS, still run calls in the same areas we covered that night. And every time I drive past Riverside Plaza, I feel my chest tighten. They never boarded up that maintenance building. I checked a few months ago, drove by on my way home after a shift just to see. The door was still hanging open, same as it was that night, and I swear I saw fresh footprints in the mud leading up to the entrance. I did not stop to investigate. I just kept driving and told myself it was probably nothing. Probably just kids or homeless people looking for shelter. But part of me knows that is not true. Part of me knows that whoever was out there that night is still out there, waiting for the right moment, the right call, the right paramedic stupid enough to walk into a dark building alone. Lonnie transferred to a different station about 2 months after the incident. We still talk sometimes, grab a beer when our schedules line up, but we never discuss what happened at Riverside Plaza. It is like an unspoken agreement between us, a door we both decided to keep closed. I think about it though, more often than I would like to admit. I think about how close we came to being another report in Ramsey's folder, another pair of first responders who walked into a trap and did not walk out. The thing that haunts me most is not the figures in the dark or the sound of that metal door closing behind me. It is the fact that I still do not know what they wanted. Were they after drugs from our medical supplies, the ambulance itself? Or was it something worse, something the zip ties and duct tape suggested? I will never have an answer to that question. All I know is that every time my radio crackles with a call to a remote location, every time dispatch sends me somewhere isolated in the middle of the night, I hesitate for just a second before responding. And in that second, I see those drag marks in the snow, leading nowhere, put there by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. December 23rd found me sprinting through Westbrook Mall like a woman possessed, grabbing last-minute gifts for people I should have shopped for weeks ago. My sister had just reminded me that morning, via a passive-aggressive text, that her twins expected presents from their favorite aunt, and my co-workers at the veterinary clinic had organized a secret Santa I completely forgot about. By 9:45, most stores were pulling down their gates, and the cheerful holiday music piping through the speakers felt almost mocking as I clutched my overflowing bags and headed for the exit. The crowds had thinned to almost nothing, just a few stragglers like me and the tired employees counting down their final minutes. I remember thinking how nice it was to finally have some breathing room after fighting through packed aisles all evening. That thought would feel like a cruel joke about 20 minutes later. The parking garage had been full when I arrived around 6, so I ended up in the overflow lot on the far east side of the property, the kind of poorly lit expanse that malls pretend does not exist in their promotional materials. My Subaru Forester sat near the back corner, underneath a light pole that had apparently burned out sometime during my shopping spree. December air bit through my jacket as I pushed through the side exit, and I could see my breath forming small clouds with each exhale. The lot was maybe a quarter full now, scattered vehicles left behind by mall employees and other late shoppers. I shifted the bags in my arms, plastic handles cutting into my fingers, and started the long walk toward my car. About halfway across the first row, I noticed a man leaning against a dark sedan 2 rows over, phone pressed to his ear. He seemed absorbed in conversation, but something about the angle of his head caught my attention. His face was tilted toward the phone, but his eyes were following me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Holiday stress, too much caffeine, an overactive imagination fed by too many true crime podcasts. I kept walking. The man was white, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark puffy jacket and jeans. Average build. Nothing remarkable about him except for the way he stood, loose and patient, like someone who had nowhere else to be. I glanced back once, casually, pretending to check something on my phone. He was still there, still holding his phone to his ear, but now his body had shifted to face my direction entirely. No one talks on the phone standing like that, squared up toward a stranger in a parking lot. My pace quickened without me consciously deciding to speed up. The bags bounced against my legs with each step, and I cursed myself for buying so much stuff I did not even need. A ceramic diffuser for my mother, a weighted blanket for my brother-in-law, scented candles, chocolate boxes, a stuffed elephant for the twins. All of it suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I angled slightly to the left, toward a row of cars closer to the mall building, telling myself I just wanted to take a different route. A longer route, sure, but one that kept me nearer to the building's lights. He moved too, not immediately. He waited maybe 5 seconds, but then he pushed off from the sedan and started walking in a parallel line to mine, still holding that phone to his ear like a prop. The distance between us stayed constant, about 40 feet, and he matched my pace with an ease that made my throat tighten. This was not coincidence. This was not some guy waiting for his wife to finish shopping. I pulled my own phone from my pocket, genuinely this time, and pretended to make a call while I kept walking. "Hey, yeah, I am almost at the car," I said to no one, loud enough for my voice to carry across the cold air. "Can you come meet me? I am in the East Lot." The words felt flimsy, a pathetic bluff that I doubted would fool anyone. I risked another glance. The man had stopped walking but remained standing between 2 parked trucks, watching me. Not hiding anymore, not pretending. Just watching, phone now lowered to his side, as if he knew the game had changed and did not care. My car was maybe 60 feet away now. I could see the familiar shape of my Forester, the little dent on the rear bumper from when I backed into a mailbox last spring. Safety was right there, so close I could almost taste it. I abandoned any pretense of calm and walked faster, nearly jogging, the bags swinging wildly and smacking against my thighs. My keys were buried somewhere in my purse, and I started digging for them one-handed while trying not to drop everything. That is when I heard the engine, a low rumble coming from somewhere behind me, growing louder. I turned my head just enough to see a white van, windowless on the sides, the kind contractors use, pulling slowly out of a parking spot near the back of the lot. It was not heading toward the exit. It was heading toward me. The van crawled forward at maybe 5 miles per hour, its headlights off despite the darkness, and I realized with a sickening clarity that it was positioning itself between me and my car. I changed direction immediately, cutting hard to my right, aiming for the mall entrance I had come out of just minutes ago. My heels clicked frantically against the pavement, and I heard the van accelerate slightly, adjusting its course to intercept me. The man by the truck started walking again too, faster now, closing the distance with long, deliberate strides. They were working together. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was coordinated, planned, rehearsed. They had probably watched me park hours ago, noted which car was mine, waited for the lot to empty out. I dropped 2 of the shopping bags without thinking, barely registering the sound of something glass shattering inside one of them, probably the ceramic diffuser. My legs burned as I pushed myself to move faster, but the mall entrance seemed impossibly far away, a distant rectangle of light that kept receding no matter how hard I ran. The van's engine growled behind me, closer now, and I could hear the crunch of its tires on loose gravel. Then I saw the mall door, the one I had exited through, and a security guard was standing there, locking it from the inside. He was an older black man with gray hair, wearing one of those standard Navy uniforms with a patch on the shoulder. I screamed. Not words, just a raw, desperate sound that tore out of my throat before I could even think. The guard looked up, startled, and I waved my arms wildly while still running toward him. "Help me, please." My voice cracked on the second word. He squinted into the darkness of the lot, and I saw the exact moment his expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He fumbled with the door, pushing it back open. And I have never been so grateful to see a stranger in my entire life. Behind me, I heard the van's brakes squeal, a sharp, ugly sound, and when I dared to look back, I saw it reversing, backing away toward the far end of the lot. The man on foot had vanished completely, melted into the shadows between the parked cars like he had never existed at all. I practically threw myself through the door, stumbling into the guard's arms, gasping and shaking so badly I could barely stand. He caught me, steadied me, asked me what happened in a voice that was calm but urgent. I tried to explain. The man watching me, the van blocking my path, how they had moved together like wolves herding prey, but the words came out jumbled, fractured. He guided me to a bench near the food court entrance and told me to sit while he radioed for backup. The mall was eerily quiet now, most of the lights dimmed for the night, and I sat there hugging myself and watching the door like those men might come crashing through at any second. My phone was still clutched in my hand, screen cracked from when I must have gripped it too hard during my sprint. I called 911 with trembling fingers, my voice steadier now but still thin, and told them everything I could remember. The dark sedan, the white van with no windows, the man in the puffy jacket who had tracked my every move with the patience of a predator. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both younger than me and radiating that professional calm that cops seem to learn in training. They walked me through my story twice, asking clarifying questions, taking notes in little spiral pads. Officer Reyes, the woman, told me I did the right thing by running toward the building instead of trying to reach my car. "They count on you panicking," she said, her voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. "They expect you to keep heading for your vehicle because that is where you feel safe. But once you are at your car, you are trapped, keys out, distracted, vulnerable." She explained that this kind of coordinated approach was a known tactic, used by trafficking rings and robbery crews alike. The spotter identifies the target, tracks their movements, relays information to the driver. The van moves into position to block the escape route, and by the time the victim realizes what is happening, they are boxed in. I listened to her words, but they seemed to float past me, landing somewhere distant, like she was describing something that happened to someone else entirely. They drove me out to the lot to retrieve my car, one cruiser in front and one behind, headlights flooding the pavement with light. The shopping bags I had dropped were still there, scattered on the asphalt, their contents spilled out. A shattered candle, a crushed gift box, the stuffed elephant face down in a puddle of melted frost. I did not stop to pick them up. Officer Reyes walked me to my Forester and waited while I unlocked it, checking the back seat before I got in. "Old habit," she said with a half smile when she caught my questioning look. The sedan the man had been leaning against was gone. The white van was gone. No tire tracks, no cigarette butts, nothing left behind to prove that any of it had actually happened. If it were not for the security guard and the police officers standing around me, I might have convinced myself I imagined the whole thing. Part of me wanted to believe that. Part of me still does. I drove home that night with every light in my rearview mirror looking like a threat, checking my mirrors obsessively, taking random turns to make sure no one was following me. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in my car for 10 minutes just watching the lot, scanning for white vans or dark sedans or men standing too still. My sister called while I was sitting there. She wanted to know if I had bought the gifts for the twins, and I burst into tears before I could even say hello. I told her everything, words tumbling out between sobs, and she drove over that same night with her husband and stayed until morning. The police never caught them. They reviewed the mall security footage, but the cameras in that section of the lot had been broken for months. Budget cuts, deferred maintenance, the usual excuses. The footage from other angles showed the van entering and leaving, but the plates were obscured with mud, probably intentionally. A detective called me a week later to say the case was still open, but there were no leads. Open, but cold. Open, but forgotten. It has been almost 2 years now, and I still cannot shop alone after dark. I order everything online, even groceries, and if I absolutely have to go somewhere at night, I make my husband come with me, or I do not go at all. We got married last October. Ben proposed in July, on a hiking trail in broad daylight surrounded by other people, which is the only way I can be in public spaces anymore without my heart racing. I took a self-defense class. I bought pepper spray and one of those personal alarms that shrieks when you pull the pin. I park under lights now, always, even if it means walking farther in the daytime. I know people think I am being dramatic, that I got lucky and should just move on, but they do not understand what it feels like to be hunted. To realize, in a single horrible moment, that you are prey and there are predators circling and no one is coming to save you. That security guard, his name was Lawrence, I found out later. He saved my life that night. I never got to thank him properly. By the time I went back to the mall to find him, he had transferred to a different location. I think about him sometimes, wonder if he knows what he did for me. I think about those men too. I wonder if they found someone else that night after I got away. I wonder if she was as lucky as I was. I wonder if they are still out there, waiting in some other parking lot, watching some other woman walk alone toward her car. Christmas Eve of 2022 found me standing behind the counter of a speedway station off Route 9 in rural Ohio, watching snow pile up against the gas pumps like white barricades. My graduating class from high school back in 2012 was probably gathered around fireplaces and dinner tables by now. 10 years into careers and marriages and kids, while I counted cigarette packs and restocked energy drinks for minimum wage, plus $1 for the holiday shift. Nobody wanted to work Christmas Eve, especially not the graveyard hours. But I needed the money. Rent was due on the 1st, my car needed a new alternator, and my landlord had made it clear that late payments meant eviction. So there I was, alone in that fluorescent box of a building, surrounded by beef jerky displays and lottery ticket machines, listening to a staticky radio play holiday songs that sounded more like funeral dirges through the cheap speakers. The store sat about 2 miles from the nearest town, a lonely outpost for truckers and travelers. And on a night like this, I expected maybe 3 customers total before my shift ended at 6 in the morning. The snow had started around 8 that evening, light flurries at first, then thick curtains of white that reduced visibility to almost nothing. By 11, the parking lot lights were barely visible from inside, their glow swallowed by the storm. I remember standing at the window with a cup of burnt coffee, watching the occasional car crawl past on the highway without stopping, their headlights dim yellow smears in the blizzard. The heating system rattled and groaned like it was fighting for its life, and every few minutes the lights flickered from the wind battering the power lines. I had my phone propped up on the counter, scrolling through Instagram posts of people celebrating with their families, feeling that particular kind of loneliness that only hits when you realize everyone else is somewhere warm and wanted. The station felt smaller somehow, the aisles tighter, the ceiling lower, like the storm outside was pressing down on the building itself. I checked the clock above the door for probably the 100th time that night. It read 11:47. That was when the headlights cut through the snow. A dark SUV, something big like a Suburban or an Expedition, pulled into the lot and parked near the air pump station, away from the cameras mounted above the entrance. I straightened up behind the counter, grateful for something to break the monotony, and watched 2 figures climb out of the vehicle. They walked slowly toward the door, hunched against the wind, both wearing heavy winter coats with the hoods pulled up. Nothing unusual about that given the weather. The door chimed when they pushed through, bringing a gust of frozen air and snowflakes that melted instantly on the tile floor. I gave them the standard greeting, the automatic "welcome in" that came out of my mouth 100 times a shift. But neither of them responded. They just stood there for a moment, stomping snow off their boots, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Then they split up, one heading toward the refrigerated drinks at the back, the other wandering down the snack aisle. I watched them on the small security monitor behind the counter, more out of boredom than suspicion. The guy in the snack aisle picked up a bag of chips, examined it, put it back, grabbed a candy bar, turned it over in his hands, returned it to the shelf. He did this 3 or 4 times, never actually selecting anything, just touching products and moving on. The other one opened a refrigerator door, stood there letting the cold air spill out, then closed it without taking a drink. They moved through the store like they were killing time, like they were waiting for something. I glanced at the clock again. 11:52. The first guy, the one in the snack aisle, made his way toward the counter with a single pack of gum. He placed it down without looking at me, and I noticed his hands. They were covered in latex gloves, the kind you see at hospitals or crime scenes on television. My throat tightened. I looked toward the other guy by the fridges and saw the same thing. Pale latex stretched over his fingers as he pretended to read the label on a bottle of orange juice. That was the moment I understood that this night was about to become something very different from the quiet shift I had expected. The one with the gum looked up at me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. He was wearing a ski mask underneath his hood, black fabric with holes cut for his eyes and mouth. His eyes were pale, almost gray, and they held mine with a stillness that made my legs feel weak. He did not blink. He did not move. He just stared at me like he was memorizing every detail of my face, cataloging me for some purpose I did not want to imagine. Then he spoke, his voice low and flat, almost bored. "Walk to the door and lock it. Turn the sign to closed. Do it slow, do it calm, and do not touch anything else." I opened my mouth to say something, maybe to ask what was happening, maybe to tell him I would give him whatever he wanted, but no words came out. The second man had appeared beside him now, and he pulled back his hood to reveal an identical ski mask. In his right hand, held close to his body so it would not be visible from outside, was a pistol. It was matte black and looked well used, the kind of gun that had seen action before. He did not point it at me. He did not need to. The message was clear enough. I walked to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, each step taking an eternity. The snow was still falling heavy outside, and I could not see the highway anymore, could not see any headlights or signs of life beyond the white wall of the blizzard. I turned the deadbolt, the click echoing loud in the silence, and flipped the plastic sign from open 24 hours to closed. When I turned back around, both of them had moved behind the counter, positioning themselves where the security cameras could not capture their faces. The one with the gun gestured toward the register with his chin. "Open it," he said. I punched in my code and the drawer slid open with a mechanical chime, revealing maybe $200 in small bills. Neither of them even glanced at it. The unarmed one, the one with the gray eyes, leaned close to me. I could smell cigarette smoke on his breath, stale and sharp. "We are not here for that," he said. "We are here for the safe. And you are going to sit down, stay quiet, and wait with us until it opens." He checked his watch, a cheap digital thing with a cracked screen. 34 minutes. They made me sit on the floor behind the counter, my back against the cigarette display case, my knees pulled up to my chest. The one with the gun, the shorter of the two, positioned himself by the window where he could watch the parking lot without being seen from outside. The other one, gray eyes, sat on the small stool I usually use during slow nights, spinning slowly back and forth like a bored child waiting for a dentist appointment. Nobody spoke. The radio kept playing Christmas songs. Silent Night segueing into Jingle Bells with cruel irony, and I wanted to scream at it to shut up. Minutes crawled by like hours. I counted the tiles on the ceiling, counted my own heartbeats, counted anything to keep my mind from spiraling into panic. Some point I realized I was shivering, though the heating system was still pumping warm air into the store. It was the kind of cold that comes from inside, from fear that has settled into your bones and refuses to leave. I thought about my mom, probably asleep by now in her apartment across town, expecting me to call her in the morning like I did every Christmas. I thought about whether I would get to make that call. Around 12:15, Gray Eyes started talking. Not to me exactly, but in my direction, like he was thinking out loud and I just happened to be there. "You work every Friday night," he said, his voice casual, almost friendly. "And every other Wednesday. You close alone on those shifts. The other guy, the older one with the beard, he leaves at 10 and you take over until morning." My stomach turned to ice. He continued, ticking off details like he was reading from a list. "Police patrol comes by around 2 in the morning, sometimes 2:30. They slow down, check the lot, but they never come inside unless there is a car parked out front. No car, no check. That is why we parked around back, behind the dumpsters." He smiled beneath his mask. I could see the fabric stretch around his mouth. "We have been watching this place for 9 days. We know when the cash pickups happen. We know the safe has a 30-minute time lock after midnight. We know you are the only one here, and we know nobody is coming to save you." He leaned forward, his gray eyes fixed on mine. "So relax. Do what we say, and you will be home by sunrise. Make trouble, and you will not be going home at all." The safe beeped at exactly 12:30, a small electronic chirp that cut through the silence like a gunshot. Both of them straightened up, suddenly alert, the casual patience of the past half hour evaporating in an instant. Gray Eyes pulled me to my feet by my arm, his grip strong enough to leave bruises I would find the next day. "Open it," he said. "Now." I walked to the back office on unsteady legs, the two of them flanking me like prison guards escorting an inmate to his cell. The safe was a squat gray box bolted to the floor beneath the manager's desk, and my fingers fumbled with the combination, slipping on the dial, getting it wrong the first time. The one with the gun pressed the barrel against the back of my skull, cold metal kissing my skin, and suddenly my hands steadied. Fear has a way of sharpening your focus when death is whispering in your ear. The lock clicked open on the second try. Inside were stacks of bills, mostly 20s and 10s, bundled with rubber bands. Maybe $4,000, $5 at most. Gray Eyes shoved me aside and started stuffing the money into a black duffel bag he had produced from somewhere under his coat. The whole process took less than 2 minutes. I stood there watching, waiting for them to leave, waiting for this nightmare to end so I could collapse and cry and call the police. But they did not leave. Gray Eyes zipped the duffel closed and slung it over his shoulder, then turned to look at me with those pale, empty eyes. "Here is the problem," he said, his voice still calm, still conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "You have seen us. Not our faces, but our builds, our heights, the way we move. You heard our voices. You could describe us to a sketch artist, give them enough to work with." He exchanged a glance with his partner, some silent communication passing between them. "We cannot have that." The one with the gun grabbed my wrist and yanked me toward the back door, the one that led to the storage area and the dumpsters behind the building. I started to resist, digging my heels into the floor, but he was stronger than me and my shoes just slid on the linoleum. "Please," I heard myself say, my voice cracking like a teenager's. "I will not say anything. I did not see anything. Just take the money and go. Please. I have a family. I have a mother who is waiting for me." Gray Eyes opened the back door, letting in a blast of frozen air and swirling snow. "Everyone has a mother," he said. "Walk." The storage area was dark except for the weak glow of a single security light mounted above the back entrance, its beam almost useless against the thick curtain of falling snow. They pushed me forward into the cold, my sneakers sinking into 6 inches of fresh powder, the wind cutting through my thin work shirt like 1,000 tiny knives. I could see their SUV now, parked behind the dumpsters exactly where Gray Eyes had said it would be. Its engine still running, exhaust fumes rising and disappearing into the storm. This was it. They were going to drive me somewhere remote, somewhere the snow would cover my body until spring thaw, somewhere nobody would think to look for a gas station attendant who simply vanished on Christmas Eve. My mind raced through options, calculated odds, weighed the certainty of death if I went with them against the possibility of death if I ran. The one with the gun was slightly behind me, to my left. Gray Eyes was ahead, walking toward the vehicle to open the back door. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, neither of them had a direct line on me. I did not think. I did not plan. I just moved. I pivoted right and sprinted toward the corner of the building, toward the front parking lot, toward the road, toward anything that was not that black SUV and whatever fate waited inside it. I heard shouting behind me, muffled by the wind and the snow, and then a sound I will never forget as long as I live. A sharp crack followed by an explosion of brick dust from the wall inches from my head. He had fired at me. He had actually fired at me. I kept running, slipping on ice, catching myself with one hand in the snow, pushing back up without stopping. I rounded the corner of the building and saw headlights on the highway. two yellow eyes cutting through the blizzard, getting closer. I ran toward them, waving my arms, screaming words that the wind stole from my mouth before they could form. The vehicle, a pickup truck with a plow attachment on the front, slowed as it approached. I threw myself into the road, directly into its path, forcing it to stop. The driver, a heavy man in a flannel jacket with a gray beard and confused eyes, rolled down his window and asked what the hell was going on. I could not answer. I just climbed into his passenger seat, locked the door, and told him to drive. He must have seen something in my face, some animal terror that convinced him not to argue, because he put the truck in gear and pulled away. I looked back through the rear window, expecting to see the SUV in pursuit, but there was nothing. Just snow and darkness and the fading glow of the gas station disappearing into the storm. The man in the truck was named Howard Gilmore, and he drove me straight to the county sheriff's station 12 miles down Route 9. I gave my statement 3 times that night, once to the deputy on duty, once to the sheriff himself when he came in at 4 in the morning, and once more to a detective from the state police who arrived around dawn. They found the SUV abandoned 2 days later in a Walmart parking lot outside Columbus, wiped clean of prints, registered to a woman in Pennsylvania who reported it stolen 3 weeks earlier. The security footage from the gas station showed 2 masked figures, height and build matching my description, but nothing that could identify them. No arrests were ever made. The case went cold within 6 months, filed away with hundreds of other unsolved robberies across the Midwest. I never went back to that speedway. I never worked another night shift anywhere. I moved to Indiana that spring to live closer to my mom, took a job at a warehouse where I clock out at 5 and drive home while the sun is still up. Sometimes when I am alone and the house is quiet, I think about those gray eyes watching me through the holes in that ski mask, and I wonder if he ever thinks about the one who got away. I wonder if he is watching some other gas station right now, counting the days, learning the patterns, waiting for another Christmas Eve and another person who needs the holiday pay badly enough to work alone in the dark. I made it out. I survived. But I left something behind in that snowstorm, some sense of safety I will never get back. Every time I see a black SUV slow down near me, every time a stranger in a winter coat watches me a little too long, I feel it again. That certainty that the world is full of predators, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and them is luck, timing, and a stranger in a pickup truck who decided to stop. Night shifts in the emergency room have a way of blending together, especially during the holidays. My 10th year as an ER nurse at St. Francis Memorial in Chicago meant I had seen pretty much everything December could throw at us. Drunk drivers, kitchen accidents from people who had no business deep frying turkeys, the usual spike in domestic calls that nobody likes to talk about. That week before Christmas in 2017 started out feeling like any other holiday rush. We were short-staffed because half the nurses had requested time off to be with their families, and those of us pulling doubles were running on coffee and vending machine snacks. I remember complaining to my coworker Patrice about how my feet were killing me, how I just wanted to survive until the 26th so I could sleep for 3 days straight. She laughed and told me to pace myself because the weekend was going to be worse. Neither of us knew how right she was, just not in the way we expected. It was around 2 in the morning on that Wednesday when I first noticed something strange about our patient intake. A woman came in with a nasty gash on her forehead and bruising along her left arm, telling the triage nurse she had slipped on a patch of ice outside her apartment building. Standard winter stuff, nothing unusual. But then an hour later, another woman arrived. Different age, different background, but almost identical injuries. Left side of the body, defensive bruising on the forearm, a cut somewhere on the face. She lived in the same neighborhood, over on Ashland Avenue near the old meatpacking district. I processed her paperwork and asked the usual questions, and she gave me the same answer with this weird flat tone in her voice. Fell on the ice. Did not see it coming. Just want to go home. I wrote it down and moved on because we had 12 other patients waiting. But something stuck with me. The way she kept glancing toward the exit, like she was expecting someone to walk through those doors any second. By 4 in the morning, we had admitted a third patient from that same area. This one was a guy in his early 20s, clearly intoxicated from some office holiday party, wearing a wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the freezing temperature outside. He had a split lip and scrapes on his palms, the kind you get when you throw your hands out to break a fall. Same story. Slipped on ice, went down hard, just needed to get cleaned up and head home. But when I was cleaning the cuts on his hands, I noticed something that made me pause. The scrapes were on his palms, sure, but the bruising on his forearms was on the outer side, not the inner side where you would expect if someone braced themselves against the ground. These were defensive wounds. I had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the pattern. Someone had grabbed him, hard, and he had tried to pull away. I asked him directly if someone had hurt him, and he just stared at me with this glazed expression before repeating that he fell on the ice. His voice cracked when he said it. Around 5:30, I finally got my first real break of the night. The waiting room had cleared out a bit, and Patrice told me to go grab some air before the morning rush started. I pushed through the side door near the ambulance bay, the one the staff uses when we need a few minutes away from the fluorescent lights and the constant beeping of monitors. The cold hit me immediately. It was maybe 15 degrees out there, and my scrubs did nothing to block the wind. I stood there rubbing my arms, watching my breath form little clouds in the darkness, when I noticed him. A man standing near the edge of the parking lot, maybe 30 feet from the ambulance entrance. He was just standing there in a dark coat, hands in his pockets facing the sliding doors. Not moving toward them, not walking away, just watching. I figured he was waiting for someone, maybe a family member getting discharged, so I did not think much of it at first. But then a full minute passed and he did not move, did not check his phone, did not pace around to stay warm. He just stood there like a statue, staring at those doors, and I got this uncomfortable feeling in my chest that I could not quite name. I went back inside after maybe 5 minutes because the cold was unbearable, and I needed to get back to work anyway. The rest of the morning passed in the usual blur of minor emergencies and paperwork. We discharged the young guy with the split lip around 7, gave him instructions for wound care, told him to follow up with his primary doctor if anything got worse. The 2 women from earlier had already left before my break. I did not think about the man in the parking lot again until almost 10 in the morning, when I was finally getting ready to clock out. That is when I saw her, the second woman, the one from Ashland Avenue sitting in one of the plastic chairs in the hallway near the vending machines. She was not waiting for anything. She was just sitting there with her coat pulled tight around her, clutching her purse against her stomach like someone might try to rip it away from her. Her face was pale, and even from 20 feet away I could see that she was trembling. I walked over and asked if she was okay, if she needed help with something, and she looked up at me with these wide, terrified eyes. She grabbed my wrist before I could react, her fingers ice cold even through the fabric of my sleeve. She told me she could not leave. She said she had tried to go home after we discharged her, walked out to catch the bus on Michigan Avenue, and that is when she saw him. A man in a dark coat standing across the street, watching her. She thought maybe it was a coincidence, so she started walking toward the bus stop, and he followed. Not running, not calling out to her, just walking behind her at the same pace, keeping the same distance, like he was attached to her by an invisible string. She ducked into a convenience store and waited for 15 minutes, and when she came out, he was still there, waiting. So she came back to the hospital because she did not know where else to go, because at least here there were people around, security guards, cameras. She asked me if I could call someone, the police maybe, and her voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand her. I told her to stay right there, that I would get security, and I walked as fast as I could toward the front desk without breaking into a run. Our head of security that morning was a guy named Raymond, a former cop who had retired after 25 years on the force and took the hospital job because he said he was too restless to sit at home. I had always liked Raymond because he took everything seriously, never brushed off concerns or made you feel like you were overreacting. When I told him about the woman and the man who had been following her, he did not hesitate. He grabbed his radio, called for another guard to meet us in the hallway, and asked me to show him where she was sitting. We walked back together, and Raymond sat down next to her and started asking questions in that calm, steady voice that good cops develop over years of practice. She told him the same thing she had told me, and he nodded along, writing notes in a small pad he kept in his shirt pocket. Then he asked her to describe the man, height, build, what he was wearing, anything distinctive about his face. She said he was average height, maybe 5'9" or 10, wearing a dark coat that went down past his knees. She could not remember his face clearly because she had been too scared to look directly at him. Raymond told her to wait with me while he checked the security footage from earlier that morning. He said it would only take a few minutes and he would come back with whatever he found. I sat down next to the woman. Her name was Iris, I learned, which I had not caught during her intake earlier, and tried to keep her calm. She kept apologizing for making a scene, for bothering everyone, and I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that she did the right thing by coming back. We sat there in silence for a while, watching the morning staff move through the hallways, the occasional patient being wheeled past on a gurney. About 20 minutes later, Raymond came back, and the expression on his face told me everything before he even opened his mouth. He pulled me aside and spoke in a low voice so Iris would not hear. He told me the man had been on camera, not just that morning but for the past 4 days. Every single night, starting around midnight and staying until dawn, pacing near the ambulance entrance, the main entrance, the side door by the parking garage, always watching, always waiting, and then following people who left alone. Raymond showed me some of the footage on his phone, and watching it made my skin go tight all over. The clips were grainy, black and white, the kind of quality you get from budget security cameras that hospitals never bother to upgrade. But you could see him clearly enough. The same figure, same coat, same posture, appearing at different entrances throughout the night. In one clip from 2 days earlier, you could see him standing near the main entrance around 1 in the morning. A woman walked out, young, wearing what looked like a cocktail dress under an open jacket, clearly coming from some holiday event, and within seconds of her passing through the doors, he started moving. Not toward her exactly, but parallel to her, matching her pace as she walked toward the street. The camera lost them both once they reached the sidewalk. In another clip, a man stumbled out of the ER looking drunk and disoriented, and the figure in the coat detached from the shadows near the parking garage and followed him into the darkness between the streetlights. Raymond told me he had counted at least 11 instances over 4 nights. 11 people followed into the snow-covered streets where the cameras could not see what happened next. The police arrived around noon, 2 detectives who looked exhausted and irritated in the way cops always do during the holidays when they get called out for something complicated. Raymond walked them through the footage while I stayed with Iris, who had started crying quietly into a tissue someone had given her. One of the detectives, a woman with short gray hair and a voice like sandpaper, came over to take her statement. She asked Iris to describe what had happened when she first came to the ER earlier that night. And that is when Iris said something that made everything click into place in the worst possible way. She said she had not fallen on the ice. She said a man had grabbed her from behind while she was walking home from a bar, dragged her into an alley, and she had fought him off. She ran to the hospital because it was the closest place with lights and people. But she had been too scared to tell anyone the truth, too ashamed, too worried that no one would believe her. So she said she fell on the ice because it was easier than explaining. The detective wrote everything down, her face completely neutral, and then asked Iris if the man who grabbed her in the alley was the same man who followed her that morning. Iris said she did not know. She never saw his face in the alley. It was too dark. I went home that afternoon and barely slept. I kept thinking about those 11 people on the security footage, wondering how many of them had the same story as Iris. How many had lied about falling on the ice because they were too scared or ashamed to say what really happened? And how many of them made it home safe after that man followed them into the darkness? The police put out an alert, increased patrols around the hospital for the next few weeks, and Raymond made sure there was always a guard stationed near each entrance during the overnight hours. They never caught the guy. That is the part that still keeps me up some nights. The detectives told us later that they had pulled footage from traffic cameras and nearby businesses, traced his movements for a few blocks in each direction, but he always seemed to disappear into the same handful of streets near Ashland Avenue. The neighborhood with all the old meatpacking buildings, half of them abandoned, full of loading docks and back alleys where someone could vanish in seconds. They found a sleeping bag and some empty food containers in one of those buildings, signs that someone had been living there, but no fingerprints, no identification, nothing that could tell them who he was. After Christmas, the man stopped showing up on our cameras. Just like that, he was gone. No explanation, no arrest, no final confrontation. He simply was not there anymore. The detective with the gray hair called me in January to follow up, asked if we had seen anything else suspicious, and I told her no. She said they were still working the case but did not sound hopeful. I checked the news obsessively for weeks after that, looking for reports of assaults or worse in that part of the city, but I never found anything that seemed connected. Maybe he moved on to another hospital, another neighborhood, another city. Maybe something happened to him that we will never know about, or maybe he is still out there somewhere, waiting for the next holiday season, the next wave of exhausted and vulnerable people stumbling out of emergency rooms at 2 in the morning. I still work night shifts at St. Francis, 7 years later, and I still look toward the ambulance entrance every time I step outside for a break. I still scan the parking lot for a figure in a dark coat. And every December, when the ice cases start coming in, the ones who say they fell but will not look me in the eye, I make sure to ask them twice if they are telling me the truth. Most of them say yes, but I always wonder about the ones who hesitate before answering. Holiday prep always puts me in a certain mindset, and that year was no different. I was juggling work, family plans, and a long list of things I had promised to cook for a small gathering at my sister's place. Groceries became almost a daily stop, and the store near my apartment felt like neutral ground. Bright, busy, harmless. My routine was simple: go in, get what I needed, keep moving. Nothing about that week suggested trouble. At least not until I noticed an older man standing a few feet from the dairy aisle. His attention fixed on me in a way that didn't match the chaos of holiday shoppers. He had this slightly slouched posture, like someone trying to shrink into their own coat, but his eyes stayed locked. I brushed it off at first, assuming he was waiting for someone or confused about where to find something. A few days passed before I saw him again, and that second encounter felt harder to dismiss. Different day, different hour, yet there he was, standing in the parking lot, angled directly toward my car, as if he'd been waiting for the moment I stepped outside. The air was sharp with cold, and the sky had that early December dullness that made the parking lot feel bigger than usual. I remember tightening my scarf and trying to convince myself it was all coincidence. People linger all the time, especially around the holidays. But something about the way he stood perfectly still, hands tucked into the front pocket of a faded brown hoodie, made it impossible to treat it as background noise. I walked quickly, got in the car, and left before giving myself a chance to look back. By the third time, coincidence didn't even seem like an option. I spotted him inside again, but this time he was dressed like an employee, an apron tied unevenly, name tag missing, sleeves rolled past his elbows in a way I'd never seen on actual staff. He positioned himself near the shelf I needed, pretending to straighten cereal boxes that didn't need straightening. Each movement felt exaggerated, like he was mimicking what he thought a worker might do. When I changed aisles, he drifted too, repeating the same awkward routine. The fluorescent lights made every detail sharper: the uneven stubble along his jaw, the way one of his boots dragged slightly when he stepped. People around us were wrapped in their own errands, completely unaware of the strange choreography happening a few feet away. What unsettled me the most was how he blended in just enough to stay unnoticed by everyone except me. Some days he wandered near the entrance with a handbasket he never filled. Other days he stood by the registers pretending to bag groceries, tapping the counter lightly as if keeping time with music only he could hear. Each time, he positioned himself exactly where I would naturally pass. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was lonely, maybe he was harmless. But a quiet tension started living in my chest whenever I pushed open those sliding doors. Early December had barely started, and somehow I had gained a silent shadow I couldn't explain and didn't know how to shake. Everything escalated the night I stopped by for gift wrapping supplies. The store was quieter than usual, maybe because a fresh layer of snow had started falling, soft enough to muffle the sounds of cars on the nearby road. My plan was simple: get tape, ribbon, a couple of gift bags, and head straight home. I remember feeling relieved when I didn't see him anywhere inside. The aisles were calm, the holiday displays predictable, and for a moment I felt silly for letting a stranger take up so much of my headspace. I checked out quickly, tugged my coat tighter against the cold, and pushed open the doors into the dim parking lot. The snow had settled into a thin sheet across the pavement, crunching under my boots as I walked. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps matching the rhythm of mine. When I turned slightly, I caught sight of him a short distance behind me, walking with that same dragging step on one side. His gaze didn't waver. The way he moved, steady, deliberate, sent a ripple of adrenaline through me. I didn't want to run and draw attention, but I also wasn't about to lead him straight to my car. My pulse climbed fast enough that I had to slow my breathing to keep my thoughts clear. I veered toward the small pharmacy across the lot, hoping the bright lights and other customers would give me a buffer. Inside, the air was warmer and smelled faintly of cinnamon-scented candles, something I usually liked but barely noticed in that moment. I pretended to browse the holiday aisle, picking up boxes I didn't need just to stay looking occupied. A few seconds later, the bell over the door chimed, and he walked in. No hesitation, no attempt to hide that he had followed me. Just a quiet, direct entrance. He drifted to the end of the aisle, picking up a bottle of lotion and rotating it in his hands like he was trying to figure out what people normally did in stores. The shift in atmosphere was instant. Other shoppers kept moving around us, unaware of how tightly my attention was locked on him. Every time I turned down another aisle, he adjusted his position as if trying to keep a line of sight open. I remember focusing on small details because they helped me stay grounded. The hum of the refrigeration unit near the back, the faint tapping of someone sorting cough drops behind the counter, the squeak of a cart with a loose wheel somewhere in the store. All those ordinary noises felt strangely far away compared to the awareness of that man a few steps behind me, pretending to be part of a place he clearly didn't belong to. Eventually, I approached the counter under the pretense of asking a question, mostly just wanting to put a human barrier between us. The pharmacist on duty looked tired but kind enough, and I remember lowering my voice and asking if I could stay near the register for a minute because someone had followed me inside. Her expression shifted immediately. Not dramatic, just alert, and she nodded once, stepping slightly forward as if to shield my view. When I glanced back toward the aisles, he had moved closer, pretending to study a row of vitamins, even though he wasn't actually facing them. The fluorescent lights reflected off the top of his hood, making the fabric look almost metallic. I felt a wave of relief when the pharmacist picked up the store phone and quietly asked for the manager. A few moments later, the manager, a younger guy named Brian, came from the back. He didn't look surprised when I pointed out the man. Instead, he let out a slow breath through his nose and told me to stay where I was. He walked over to the stranger, spoke to him in a low voice, and then guided him toward the entrance with a firmness that didn't invite discussion. The man didn't argue. He just stepped outside and stood there motionless like he didn't know what to do next. Snowflakes clung to the shoulders of his hoodie, and for a second he resembled someone waiting for a ride. But Brian returned with this heavy look on his face, one that told me he had seen this before. When I explained everything, from the grocery store encounters to the walk across the lot, Brian listened closely and asked if it had all happened this month. When I confirmed, he nodded again, as if connecting pieces he already suspected were part of a larger pattern. He told me the grocery store had reached out to them recently, mentioning that multiple women had complained about a man appearing in different hats, different jackets, different aisles, always positioning himself to watch them. The unsettling part was that he didn't work there. He never had. He just showed up during the holiday rush, blending into the distraction of crowds and seasonal chaos. Brian advised me to drive home with someone on the phone and offered to walk me to my car. The man was gone by the time we stepped outside. The lot was quiet except for the crunch of snow under Brian's boots and the soft buzz of a street lamp flickering near the curb. I got in my car, locked the doors immediately, and didn't let myself look around until I reached the main road. The following week, I heard that security had started monitoring the grocery store entrances more closely, and the man hadn't been spotted since. No one ever figured out who he was or why he singled out certain women. Even now, when the holidays roll around, I catch myself scanning crowds without meaning to. It all stopped as suddenly as it started, but the memory of those December errands carries a weight I still can't explain. During Christmas Eve at my parents' place in 2024, I had been trying to unwind after a long week, soaking in the familiar warmth of a house packed with relatives, clinking dishes, and the smell of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. My grandmother, Nina, sat at the far end of the dining table, wrapped in her red shawl with tiny embroidered reindeer she'd stitched decades ago. She kept glancing toward the hallway that led to the back door, her cloudy blue eyes sharp in a way that didn't match the rest of her aging features. At first, nobody paid much attention. She'd done similar things in the past, usually muttering about forgetting where she put her glasses or claiming she heard the cat, even though the cat died years ago. But this time she wasn't rambling. She sat stiff, alert, listening like she recognized something the rest of us didn't. Every few minutes she whispered that someone was walking by the pantry again. Most of the family brushed it off with tight smiles and jokes about holiday stress, yet the seriousness in her voice tugged at me more than I expected. It felt like she wasn't guessing, like she'd heard that particular sound before. While everyone finished dinner, I offered to take out the trash since the kitchen bin was overflowing with wrapping paper and potato peelings. Stepping outside, the cold hit me instantly, the kind that pinches the inside of your nose and makes your eyes water. The yard was quiet, so quiet it felt hollow, with only the hum of a neighbor's distant generator breaking the stillness. As I walked around the side of the house toward the trash cans, something caught my eye: fresh boot prints in the snow. They stood out sharply under the porch light, the edges crisp, untouched by wind or melting. What unsettled me wasn't the fact that they existed, but where they led. Directly toward the house, stopping right beneath the kitchen window where, minutes earlier, my aunt had been slicing pie. There were no prints leading away, just that lonely trail straight to the siding, as if whoever made them came close, stood there for a while, and vanished. I crouched beside the prints, trying to measure how recently they were made. The snow had fallen steadily all afternoon, a powdery layer that blurred everything unless it was new. And these impressions were perfect, every ridge of the boot sole pressed cleanly into the ground. I tried to convince myself it was a relative sneaking around for a smoke break, but the boot size looked larger than anyone's I knew, and nobody had stepped outside since we arrived. When I looked up at the dark kitchen window, I noticed the faint reflection of lights flickering from inside, and for a moment I imagined someone standing there earlier, watching my family move around, eat, laugh, unaware of being observed. A strange mix of curiosity and unease tightened in my chest, as if the scene in front of me didn't belong to a normal holiday evening. I brushed snow off my sleeves, trying to ground myself before heading back inside. The warmth of the house felt heavier now, like returning to a room where something had already gone wrong. Back in the dining room, dessert plates were being passed around, and my grandmother kept shifting in her seat, her gaze still aimed toward the hallway. I decided not to mention the footprints until I figured out how to phrase it without alarming everyone. The conversation had turned lively again, my cousin joking about someone burning the cheesecake, my uncle bragging about fixing his old truck. But beneath all that noise, Grandma Nina's whisper cut through the air. She leaned toward me and said, barely audible, "He's waiting by the door now." Before I could respond, a soft knock came from the front entrance. Not a normal knock, more like someone testing how quietly they could do it. Everyone paused. Then a man's voice drifted through the wood, polite but strained, saying he was a neighbor with car trouble. I walked slowly to the door, looked through the peephole, and felt a pulse of unease I couldn't explain. The face staring back wasn't familiar, and he kept shifting just enough that his head angled toward the living room, as if trying to count how many people were inside. I stayed at the door longer than I should have, trying to make sense of the man's expression. He didn't look panicked the way someone stranded on a cold night usually would. His eyebrows were slightly raised, almost curious, and he kept changing the tilt of his head, not impatiently, but deliberately, like he wanted a clear view of whatever was behind me. The porch light caught small details on his coat, flecks of snow melting unevenly, a scuff on the left shoulder, and a thin smear of something darker near the collar. I told him through the door that I couldn't open it but could call someone for him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted his weight and leaned a little closer, the corner of his mouth tightening in a way I couldn't read. "I just need a quick hand," he said, softer this time. The air in the hallway felt stale as I backed away. When I returned to the dining room, my mom immediately asked what the neighbor needed. I told her I didn't know him, and that something felt wrong about the whole interaction. My dad moved to check the peephole himself, but by then the man had stepped out of view. We tried to settle back into dessert, but the mood was different now. My grandmother kept glancing toward the hallway again, blinking slowly, tapping her nails on the table in a rhythmic pattern she only did when nervous. My younger cousins whispered among themselves, asking whether someone had actually been at the door, or if we were just overreacting. I wanted to reassure them, but the sight of those footprints still lingered in my mind. The thought that someone might have been standing beneath the kitchen window earlier made the house feel smaller, like the walls weren't as solid as they should be. Then another sound floated through the room, this time from the side of the house. A creak, not loud but distinct, as if someone had placed their weight on the old wooden steps near the mudroom entrance. Everyone went silent. My uncle tried to laugh it off, claiming the wind must have pushed something over, but the wind hadn't picked up at all. The silence after that noise felt too deliberate, too controlled. My dad finally decided to call the police, not because we thought we were in danger, but because the footprints, the stranger, and my grandmother's comments had stacked into something we couldn't shrug off anymore. While he was talking on the phone, my grandmother mumbled, "He's still outside," and this time she said it with such certainty that even my skeptical aunt stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know whether to comfort her or listen to her. Something about the way she stared toward the mudroom made me feel like ignoring her would be a mistake. My brother grabbed a flashlight and pointed it through the kitchen window, sweeping the beam across the yard. The snow glowed under the light, smooth and untouched, except near the side steps where a new set of impressions broke the surface, spaced wider apart than the earlier ones, like someone had been moving quickly, but carefully. Minutes felt longer than they should have while we waited for the police. Every sound became suspicious, the heater turning on, the ice maker dropping cubes, distant fireworks from a nearby neighborhood. When the doorbell suddenly rang, all of us stiffened. This time the knock came after the doorbell, slow and spaced out, almost expectant. My dad shouted that the police were already on their way. No response. I walked to the window facing the driveway, pulling the curtain back just an inch. A figure stood near the porch, not directly in front of the door, but slightly to the right, angled toward the living room windows, as if that was where his attention had been the whole night. The porch light caught only the lower half of his face, leaving his eyes shadowed. He didn't move when my dad threatened to call again. He didn't call out. He just stood there, listening. The police car finally pulled into the driveway, its headlights cutting through the yard and washing over the porch. The moment that beam swept toward the figure, he stepped back. Not startled, not running, just easing himself out of the light like someone who'd been caught somewhere he wasn't ready to leave yet. By the time the officers reached the front steps, he was already moving toward the far side of the house. One officer chased after him while the other stayed by the door, asking us questions through the frame without entering right away. When the searching officer returned, he said the man had disappeared into the tree line behind the neighborhood, leaving only the trail of boot prints pressed into the snow. I asked if they matched any pattern they'd seen recently, and the officer hesitated in a way that made everyone shift uncomfortably. He said there had been several burglaries that month, all involving someone watching homes from the outside before attempting to break in. Cases where families reported hearing footsteps, soft knocks, or a stranger claiming to be a neighbor needing help. As the officers walked around the property, their flashlights bobbing through the dark, I found myself standing beside the kitchen window again. The snow beneath it was disturbed in a wider circle now, trampled by police boots, but I could still see the remnants of the earlier prints. They lined up perfectly with where someone would stand if they were trying to look in without being seen from inside. My grandmother stepped beside me, placing her hand lightly on my arm, her voice steady for the first time all night. "He was here longer than you think," she murmured, almost like she was sharing a secret she'd kept to herself. I asked her what she meant, and she said she'd heard that same quiet pacing by the pantry while we were still in the middle of dinner. She described it in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise, measured steps, pausing, shifting weight, as if someone were deciding whether to try the door. The officers came back inside with their final update. They'd found a second set of tracks near the mudroom steps and fresh impressions under another window on the opposite side of the house. Whoever it was had been circling us, choosing vantage points. We asked what we should do, and one officer suggested keeping the doors locked and leaving a porch light on through the night. He added that they'd increased patrols because the same pattern had occurred in 2 nearby neighborhoods: soft knocks, false neighbors, and windows used as vantage points. My mom asked whether the man ever tried breaking in anywhere else. The officer nodded, explaining that in a couple of cases the intruder returned after the initial approach, waiting for the family to fall asleep before attempting entry. Hearing that made the room feel heavier, like the air had sunk lower into the walls. Nobody slept much after the police left. We stayed gathered in the living room with the TV on low, every shadow feeling more deliberate than normal. But nothing else happened. Not another knock, not a sound by the mudroom, not even a gust of wind strong enough to rattle the siding. It was as if whoever had been watching us decided to move on the moment real authority arrived. By morning, the snow had covered most of the tracks around the house, softening the evidence until it looked like nothing unusual had happened. But the police called later to confirm they'd arrested someone a mile away, caught trying to force open the back door of another home just before dawn. They wouldn't share a name, but they said the boots he wore matched the impressions by our kitchen window. Every holiday since then, my grandmother still glances toward the hallway at night, listening for footsteps none of us hear. And even though everything ended without harm that evening, I still catch myself checking the windows twice, especially when the house feels too quiet. Late that December, life had slowed to a strange, almost quiet rhythm for me, out in the old farmhouse I'd been renting while saving to move closer to town. The place sat at the end of a narrow dirt road surrounded by open fields and a stretch of pines that always sounded like they were whispering when the wind picked up. I'd been working remotely for a small logistics company, buried in year-end reports, and mostly keeping to myself. The forecast had warned of a massive blizzard moving across the region, but storms were nothing new out there, so I'd stocked the pantry, charged my phone, and settled in, figuring the worst I'd deal with was boredom. The house itself had its quirks: thin walls, uneven floors, and an old heating system that hummed like a tired engine. But it had always felt predictable, familiar. That night, though, something about the air inside felt strangely static, as if the house had paused to listen for something I hadn't noticed yet. By early evening, the wind had shifted into a roaring rush that drowned out everything else, and the windows rattled like loose teeth in their frames. I kept glancing toward the porch because every now and then a dull thud echoed from that direction, quiet but heavy, the kind of sound you get when snow slides off the roof or knocks something over. I told myself that was all it was. The storm was piling drifts taller than the porch railing, and I figured some of the old furniture out there had finally given in. Still, the noise carried a rhythm that didn't match the weather, almost like someone nudging something across the planks instead of snow shifting on its own. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, so I walked to the kitchen window, expecting to see chaos. Snow everywhere, whiteout conditions swallowing the yard. What I didn't expect was how clean the surface looked, smoothed entirely by the wind, no trace of anything having moved at all. Then my eyes slid to the area near the back steps, and that's when the first real jolt of unease hit me. The entire yard was wiped blank by the storm. No tire marks, no animal tracks, not even the faint lines from the porch posts. Except for one thing, a fresh set of footprints leading straight to my back door. They were spaced evenly, crisp around the edges despite the wind, like they'd been made minutes earlier. But there were no prints leaving, no trail looping around the yard, just a single purposeful path heading right to where I stood on the other side of the glass. I leaned in closer, almost doubting my own eyesight, and that was when the lights cut out so abruptly, it felt like the house had been unplugged from the world. The furnace stopped mid-groan, the refrigerator clicked off, and the quiet that followed seemed unnaturally thick, like the storm had swallowed all sound except its own. The temperature began to drop fast, faster than I expected, and the darkness inside the house felt heavier than usual, as if the shadows had settled in with a kind of intention. I grabbed the flashlight I kept in a drawer near the stove, flicked it on, and the beam carved out narrow tunnels of pale light through the dark rooms. I stood still for a second, trying to hear anything beyond the storm's howl, and that's when I picked up on a sound that didn't belong to the weather at all. It drifted faintly from somewhere deeper in the house, slow and steady, like someone trying to control each inhale, the kind of breathing someone does when they're aware they're not alone. I stayed perfectly quiet, listening, and the sound repeated, measured, deliberate, coming from inside a home I knew I'd locked hours earlier. The nearest neighbor lived miles down the road, and the storm was only getting worse. Whoever had made those footprints outside hadn't gone back out into the wind. I kept the flashlight pointed ahead as I moved through the hallway, taking slow steps to keep the old floorboards from protesting too loudly. The house had always creaked in predictable ways, heat expanding wood, wind pushing against the siding, but now every tiny sound felt intentional, as if something in the dark was adjusting its weight, waiting for me to pass. The breathing had gone quiet again, which somehow unnerved me more than hearing it. I felt the cold creeping into the hallway, the kind that seeps through layers of clothing and settles deep. I whispered a quick curse under my breath, wishing the power would kick back on, even just enough to get the heat running again. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, an animal stuck inside, or maybe the storm bending the walls just right to mimic a person's breath. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't it. Something about the stillness told me someone was in there with me. My phone had only a sliver of battery left, and with the cell towers barely functioning in weather like that, I couldn't rely on it for much. Still, I opened the camera and used the screen's faint glow to check behind me as I moved. The hallway looked empty, just the same peeling wallpaper and the same old coat hooks hanging crooked on the wall. But the longer I stared, the more I felt like I was being watched by something hidden just outside the reach of the light. When I stepped into the living room, the air felt colder, sharper. The curtains swayed even though the windows were closed tight. I swept the flashlight across the cluttered shelves, the old rocking chair in the corner, the wood stove that had gone quiet when the power cut. Nothing moved. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that whoever had made those footprints was inside that room, standing perfectly still, waiting for me to make the next move. I backed up toward the kitchen where at least I knew the layout well enough to navigate without the light. The breathing sound returned, this time closer, just faint enough to make me question where it came from. It didn't echo through the house. It seemed rooted in a specific spot, like someone was controlling it with intention, measuring each inhale so precisely that it barely rose above the storm's wind. I gripped the flashlight tighter and scanned the counter until my hand landed on the small utility knife I used to open packages. It wasn't much, but it made me feel slightly less exposed. I kept the beam aimed toward the living room, and every muscle in my body felt like it was listening. The wind slammed hard against the siding, followed by a sharp pop from somewhere near the attic. The house was being battered from all angles, and I knew there was no way in hell any help could reach me until the storm died down. Whoever was inside had picked the perfect night. When the breathing stopped again, the silence felt heavier than the dark itself. I could hear the storm tearing across the fields outside, but the house seemed to absorb every other sound, swallowing anything that might have hinted at where the intruder was hiding. I moved slowly toward the back door, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd slipped outside again, though the lack of departing footprints said otherwise. The window beside the door had frosted over completely, leaving only blurry shapes of the yard beyond. The footprints were still there, untouched by the wind, almost like the storm itself refused to erase them. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, leaned in for a closer look, and that's when something faint brushed the floor behind me. Just the slightest drag, like a shoe shifting its weight. The sound didn't belong to the house, and it didn't belong to me. I turned around slowly, raising the flashlight, already knowing the room behind me wasn't empty anymore. The beam of the flashlight shook a little as I swept it across the kitchen doorway, the cabinets, the edge of the hall. At first, nothing looked different, just the same chipped paint and old linoleum floor reflecting a dull stripe of light. But then I caught a glimpse of something near the pantry door, the faint outline of a boot, barely visible in the darkness, as if whoever stood there was trying to blend into the shadows by staying perfectly still. My throat tightened, and the cold in the room suddenly felt sharper, like the air had thinned. I didn't call out or ask who it was. The situation had already gone too far for that. Instead, I stepped back slowly, trying not to make noise, keeping the light trained on that spot. Whoever it was didn't move, not an inch, almost as if they were waiting for the exact moment I'd look away. The storm screamed against the windows, drowning out everything, but I knew one thing for certain. Someone was standing in my kitchen. I edged toward the small staircase that led down to the mudroom, hoping to put some space between us. The temperature seemed to drop again as I reached the first step, and I could see my breath clouding the air in front of me. The flashlight flickered once, just enough to make my pulse jump, and I hit the side of it with my palm to steady the beam. That tiny motion must have given me away, because the boot near the pantry shifted, barely, but enough to confirm the figure wasn't frozen or imagining things. They were watching me, tracking me. The house felt smaller with every second, each room narrowing in around me. I thought about running into the storm, but the last time I'd seen outside, the snow was waist-high and the wind strong enough to knock someone down. If I stepped out there, I'd lose direction instantly. Staying inside felt like my best chance, even though the intruder clearly knew the place well enough to slip around without making a sound. I backed down the stairs and pulled the mudroom door shut behind me, locking it, even though I knew a simple lock wouldn't stop someone determined. The room was freezing, darker than the rest of the house, with only the thin outline of the back window letting in a faint bluish glow from the storm. I crouched behind the shelving unit, pressing my legs against a crate of firewood, trying to stay quiet while keeping my flashlight aimed at the door. For a moment, I didn't hear anything but the storm. Then a soft, steady sound rose on the other side. Breathing again, this time closer, like whoever stood in the kitchen had pressed their face near the door to listen. The old wood separated us by barely an inch, and I could almost imagine the warmth of their breath meeting the cold on my side. I tightened my grip on the utility knife, forcing myself to stay still. The door handle twitched once, then slowly turned, testing the lock with deliberate patience. Something in me snapped from fear into focus. I knew the windows were old, brittle from the cold, and the one behind the shelving unit had a loose latch I'd been meaning to fix. I shoved the shelf forward, grabbed the window frame, and forced it open as far as the snow would allow. The wind blasted in, numbing my face instantly, but I pushed through and climbed out into the drift. The snow swallowed my legs, but I crawled along the side of the house until I reached the crawl space hatch near the foundation. It was barely tall enough for me to fit, but it was shelter, hidden and too narrow for anyone to follow quickly. I slid inside, pulled the hatch closed, and waited. The breathing near the mudroom door stopped. For the next few hours, I listened to footsteps moving through the house, slow and methodical, as if the intruder were searching room by room, certain I hadn't gone far. By the time the storm finally broke and the light outside shifted to dawn, the house fell silent again. When officers arrived hours later, they found the back door lock broken from the inside and a trail of footprints leading away into the field, prints that the wind never touched, just like the ones that had led in. I moved out 2 days later and never spent another night there.